On this Thursday night, a Canadian hockey player speaks his heartbreaking truth. Kyle Beach goes on the record with allegations against a former coach.
I suppressed this memory and buried this memory to chase my dreams.
Why his accusations were covered up for 11 years and who is finally being held to account. A Winnipeg hospital worker stabbed, 2 people found dead, the potential connection between the cases. The bleak future for Afghanistan's women and girls.
There is no hope.
Another Global News exclusive from inside the Taliban-controlled nation. And bone to pick.
Listen up, people.
A message about extinction from someone who knows.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with another Canadian hockey player whose courage to come forward has again revealed a culture of cover-up in the NHL. Kyle Beach says he is the person suing the Chicago Blackhawks over how it handled his allegation of sexual assault. 11 years ago, Beach, who was 20, was called up during the Blackhawks playoff run. It was then, he says, he was sexually assaulted by Brad Aldrich, who was then the team's video coach. A damning new report confirms senior managers knew what had happened and did nothing. Aldrich was never investigated. He moved on to coach a high school team where he assaulted a minor. Beach says it destroyed him from the inside out. Now the NHL is being forced to confront how many people failed to act to protect him. Mike Drolet has our top story tonight.
It seemed like all of Chicago turned out for the 2010 Stanley Cup parade. Everyone with the Blackhawks organization was celebrated, including a little-known video coordinator,
Brad Aldrich,
and the young player who had accused Aldrich of sexual assault a month earlier, only to see the team, then the envy of the NHL, do nothing about it. In an interview with CBS, Kyle Beach, once a top Canadian junior prospect who now plays professionally in Germany, said seeing Aldrich at the parade made him feel unimportant and that he was at fault.
And now looking back and kind of going over my life over the last 11 years, there's a lot of things that I think I'd like to have back, and a lot of moments that I've lost because of I wasn't myself and I didn't have the capacity to manage those situations.
Beach came forward after an independent report found Blackhawks upper management not only knew about the allegation, but actively suppressed it. It was decided that the group would not alert human resources or do anything about the incident during the playoffs so as not to disturb team chemistry. Yet within the organization, others knew.
To be honest with you, and straightforward, I thought what I'd heard was the beginning and the end of it, and not that it was a joke, but it was something that wasn't taken super seriously at the time.
The alleged assault was eventually reported to HR, which allowed Aldrich to quietly resign to avoid an investigation. He collected severance, a bonus, and, according to the lawsuit against the Blackhawks, a letter of recommendation that helped him land a high school coaching job. In 2013, he pled guilty to sexual misconduct with a minor. Gretchen Kerr, who has researched abuse in sports, says it's another example of a sport prioritizing winning over personal well-being.
One could say they should have learned from the Graham James, and so here we are again. So the real focus should be on the people in positions of power and authority and trust who we expect to do something about these cases.
Chicago GM Stan Bowman has resigned. Winnipeg Jets GM Kevin Cheveldayoff, a former Blackhawks executive, is meeting Commissioner Gary Bettman Monday. Joel Quenneville, the decorated coach, was summoned by Bettman Thursday. Beach is being praised for his courage, speaking out against a sport and a team that was willing to win at all costs. However, hockey reckons with Beach's story won't change one lasting legacy. Beach never actually played an NHL game, so his name wasn't engraved on the Stanley Cup, alongside the other victorious Blackhawks, including Brad Aldrich. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Now to Manitoba, where police are investigating a string of violent attacks. Within hours yesterday, 2 people were found dead and a hospital worker was viciously stabbed. Police believe the incidents are connected, and as Brittany Greenslade reports, they have a suspect in custody.
It was a tragic afternoon that left many people speechless as a man allegedly walked into Winnipeg's Seven Oaks Hospital and stabbed a fellow co-worker multiple times, surrounded by staff and patients.
They're shocked. They're really worried about their co-worker. They're dealing with the stress of it.
The violent attack left a woman in her 60s fighting for her life. The horrific assault was just one of a trio of attacks. Global News has also learned the man in his 30s is allegedly responsible for killing his parents.
Members of the WPS Homicide Unit and the RCMP Major Crimes Services Unit continue to investigate all three of these incidents and believe they may be related.
The investigation began outside of Winnipeg when the RCMP went to check on a 73-year-old woman after receiving a call from a concerned friend, but instead found her dead inside the home.
An adult male who was known to the victim was identified as a potential suspect, and officers began efforts to locate him for further questioning. The initial investigation determined that he was in the Winnipeg area.
City police were alerted and began searching when they were quickly rerouted to the Seven Oaks Hospital for a stabbing and assault. There, they found the suspect they'd been pursuing.
They attended to the hospital really quickly. It appeared that this assault had just occurred, and clearly there were a number of witnesses and bystanders who identified him.
But the scope of the investigation wasn't complete. While the man was being held by police, the RCMP had linked another potential crime scene in the city related to the death of the 73-year-old woman.
The RCMP, along with the Winnipeg Police Service, would like to offer our condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of the victims. What occurred yesterday was a tragedy.
Global News has confirmed the two victims are the suspect's mother and father. Right now, the suspect is undergoing medical assessment and no charges have yet been laid. Brittany Greenslade, Global News, Winnipeg.
In Washington, top executives from 4 of the world's largest oil and gas companies are being confronted with accusations that for decades they've escaped accountability and misled the public about the role fossil fuels play in global warming. For the first time, the heads of ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, and Shell are testifying under oath before Congress. Jackson Proskow reports on what they said and why it matters.
To consume a lot of oil and natural gas.
The questions for Big Oil focused on accountability for a changing climate.
Do you agree that burning fossil fuels is a significant cause of climate change?
We've been clear on where we stand, and we accept the scientific consensus that the use of fossil fuels contributes to climate change.
That may be their view now. It's the past Congress wants to investigate.
Did any of your executives at any point mislead the American public?
For decades, there have been accusations oil companies covered up science and promoted misinformation. Studies from as far back as the 1970s were concealed. There were concerted efforts to sow doubt about whether fossil fuels were really to blame for rising global temperatures.
Over time, their tactics and rhetoric have evolved from outright blatant denial of basic science to more subtle and insidious forms of propaganda.
The head of Exxon tried to suggest it's the science that's changed.
I don't think it's fair to judge something 25 years ago with what we've learned since that.
Researchers allege a deeper plot.
This was a well-devised strategy drawn straight from Big Tobacco's playbook to confuse the public and politicians to delay action.
Yes or no? Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
In the early 90s, Big Tobacco executives faced a similar hearing.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
They lied, opening the door for lawsuits and a $200 billion settlement. If oil companies want to avoid liability, they've got political cover from Republicans pushing unfettered use of fossil fuels.
The purpose of this hearing is clear: to deliver partisan theater for primetime news.
Yet much like the move away from tobacco, the winds of change are blowing in favor of reduced emissions from oil. Only now, accountability for the past has been overshadowed by very real fears about the future of a warming planet. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Now that Pope Francis has said he is willing to visit Canada, the Tk'emlúps te Secwépemc First Nation is inviting him to visit their community and meet survivors of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in BC. In a statement, the First Nation says it would be deeply meaningful to welcome the Holy See in order for him to apologize in person and accept responsibility for its direct role in the numerous and horrific abuses committed against Indigenous children through the residential school system. Plus, it says live up to the promises to disclose documents from the schools and raise funds for survivors. For the Pope to come to Canada without real action, with simply the objective of reconciliation, glosses over and ignores this hard truth. Raquel Fletcher has more on what Indigenous leaders expect from the Pope and the Catholic Church.
For survivors of Canada's residential schools, the discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves reopened wounds that may never truly heal.
It was as if someone punched me in the stomach.
And have changed the national conversation around reconciliation.
The unmarked graves 5 months ago now set this country in a pause.
Cowessess First Nation in southern Saskatchewan discovered the graves of 751 children. It and other communities have extended invitations to Pope Francis to visit burial sites, but there are skeptics about the impact a papal visit alone may have.
The Pope's visit is going to be a lightning rod, and it may turn a corner, it may not.
A papal apology is one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, but there are others for the Catholic Church, like releasing documents that would help identify unaccounted for children and paying compensation required by the courts.
And they use some legal trickery and so forth to escape all the obligations, crying poverty.
The schools documented through written records, daily records, and they always took pictures of us.
Chief Delorme says local and regional bishops have been cooperative about releasing documents, but with no centralized organization to digitize records and make them public and accessible, it is a meticulous and time-consuming process.
One file had 800 pages, and in there is handwritten names, dates of arrival, date they were baptized, and in some cases, dates that they passed away.
The documents do not all contain children's Indigenous names, but rather the Christian names they were given at the school. It's estimated it could take 2 years to identify all the victims, potentially creating even more pain and trauma for families and communities that have already been through so much. Raquel Fletcher, Global News, Ottawa.
There is some support for survivors. A 24-hour crisis line is available for anyone experiencing pain or distress as a result of their or their loved one's residential school experience. The number is toll-free. You can speak in confidence. It's 1-866-925-4419. A former Canadian Forces reservist from Manitoba has been sentenced to 9 years in prison by a U.S. judge. 28-year-old Patrick Matthews had pleaded guilty to weapons charges. The FBI has described the case as a neo-Nazi plot to instigate a race war in the U.S. It's alleged he was part of a group called The Base that was planning violence at a Virginia gun rights rally in 2020. Prosecutors had asked for a 25-year sentence. BC's Premier goes public with a personal issue. Coming up, John Horgans' admission about his health. British Columbia Premier John Horgan revealed today he will undergo a surgical biopsy tomorrow after finding a lump in his throat. Horgan says he is confident his condition is treatable and that he's not stepping down as Premier.
This isn't the first time I've experienced a health issue like this, and it's the extraordinary efforts of our public health care system that gives me complete confidence that all will be well for me.
The 62-year-old was diagnosed with bladder cancer in 2008. He underwent treatment and was later declared cancer-free. All adults in the Northwest Territories are now eligible for a COVID-19 booster shot. As of today, any resident 18 years and older can book an appointment. They'll be eligible if it's been at least 6 months since their second dose. The Territory is the first region in Canada to offer booster shots to all adults. Ontario's Minister of Education has unveiled a three-pronged approach to help keep schools open during the pandemic.
We're providing take-home PCR tests to all schools for all grades for both symptomatic students and close contact asymptomatic cases for students and staff. We are also launching a test-to-stay program using rapid antigen tests to prevent classrooms or entire school dismissals altogether. And finally, we're mandating a stronger testing requirement on unvaccinated staff who will now be required to present 3 negative tests per week.
Ontario's government has introduced long-promised legislation it says will better protect residents in long-term care homes. Among the changes, it would double fines against individuals and care home operators who break the law. Inspectors will be able to issue compliance orders on the spot. The province has been heavily criticized for failing long-term care residents before and during the pandemic. Of Ontario's nearly 10,000 COVID-19 deaths, about 40% were residents in long-term care. The Taliban's tyranny still ahead. Afghan girls and women fight for their rights. We know thousands of people who fear Taliban rule and wanted to make it out of Afghanistan have not been able to. Among them are girls and women who now have to find a way to live with uncertainty, unsure of what their future holds. The Taliban assures the world their rights will be protected, but as Jeff Semple discovered, no one has much confidence that's true.
Planted crops should not be.
In this grade 6 classroom, these Afghan girls are learning English and dreaming big.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be a doctor. Anyways.
But those aspirations have just been upended. Under the Taliban, girls are not allowed to study beyond 6th grade. As a result, the student population, which had included girls up to grade 12, was just cut in half. This could now be 12-year-old Nikna's final year of education.
How does she feel about that?
Not good.
The private school's founder recently fled the country after he says he received this threatening letter from the Taliban accusing him of running the school in violation of Sharia law. The school's banners, which showed girls' faces, were torn down and the Taliban flag put up. The school's principal says, "I see our girls playing and singing, and it makes me really sad to think they can't continue their studies." While these girls may be deprived their education, another generation of educated women who grew up under the previous government is now being shut out of their work.
On that day when the Taliban arrived, I was at the office.
Khalida has a diploma in computer science and a law degree. She started her career a decade ago as a receptionist for an insurance company, then worked her way up to management, leading a team of 60. Khalida's brother has a disability that prevents him from working, leaving her as the family's main breadwinner, until the Taliban arrived in August.
Then from that day, I'm at home and there is no hope and I don't know how to support my family. That's why I don't see any future for the woman in Afghanistan anymore.
Khalida has family in Calgary and applied to move to Canada, but she hasn't received a response. We put Khalida's concerns about the future for women and girls directly to this senior Taliban spokesperson. All girls will be allowed to go to school and women can go to work once our government comes up with new regulations to provide them with a proper environment, he says. The Taliban made a similar commitment when it took power the first time in the 90s, but girl students were never allowed back. And Nasiba Hashimi expects that history to repeat. She and her daughters are hiding at this safe house. Even if the Taliban makes good on its promises for schools and work, she says, Afghan women will continue to be persecuted. And the scars run deep. My ex-husband and his family were very violent, she says. They beat me, forced me to stay home, and wouldn't allow me to go to university. Hashimi eventually filed for divorce and fled. She says she's received death threats from her ex-husband and the Taliban. Every moment I live in fear for myself and my children, she says. With the Taliban back in power, my daughter's future could be even darker. She's also applied for refugee status in Canada, but hasn't received a response, desperately hoping her daughters won't have to follow in her footsteps. Jeff Semple, Global News, Kabul.
Next, a prehistoric warning for humans. An unusual witness appeared at the UN General Assembly in New York. This is Frankie the dinosaur. He's part of a short film produced by the UN Development Program, which is doing all it can to get the message out about the urgency to act on climate change. Frankie, voiced by actor Jack Black, warns the world is headed for a climate disaster if governments don't transition away from fossil fuels to green energy sources.
Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes.
Remember the ship the British public voted to name Boaty McBoatface? Well, that got overruled by the government, but the ship was launched today. It's called the RRS Sir David Attenborough, named after the beloved BBC broadcaster whose nature documentaries are popular around the world. He visited the ship on the Thames today to remind people about the dangers of climate change and to press for action at the upcoming COP26 climate summit. The polar ship will make its first ocean voyage to Antarctica later this year, and it will carry robotic subs that are named, guess what? Boaty McBoatface. It did get a mention. That's Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this sunset over Sturgeon Lake, Ontario. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Chris Galis will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I'll see you Saturday for the New Reality. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.